happened so fast, I almost didn't believe it was real. 1 minute, my wife was out for a quiet evening walk, stretching her legs before dinner like she always did. The next minute, I was watching on the home security feed as a self-proclaimed HOA police officer pulled a gun on her, right there on our own sidewalk. His hand trembled, his face twisted with self-righteous rage, and I watched, frozen, as he barked nonsense about violating HOA presence codes and demanded she get on her knees. What he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly have known, was that my wife is Delta Force. Is fully active, fully trained, fully armed. And by the time he realized the mistake he made, she was already in control of the situation. How far can HOA madness go before it crosses into something criminal? From the moment we moved into Meadow Creek Estates, something felt off. Not outright hostile, not immediately threatening. Just wrong. We weren't even fully unpacked when the first letter arrived, stuffed into our mailbox without postage, sealed in HOA-branded stationery. Welcome to the neighborhood. It read at the top, in that overly saccharine font only people like Karen would find charming. But the next paragraph made it clear we weren't being welcomed, we were being warned. Per HOA Policy 11B, visible non-conforming landscaping must be removed within 72 hours. I stared at the letter, then at the backyard, half of it still covered in moving boxes, the other half untouched since the previous owners left. No violations, no changes, just air. My wife, Sam, laughed when she read it. They're testing us, she said, tossing it aside. Let them. I should have realized then. That laugh? That was the last real peace she'd have in weeks. Sam wasn't just any new neighbor. She wasn't just another pretty face moving into a gated community with a too-small dog and a yoga habit. Sam was Delta Force, still active, still classified, still the most competent, lethal person I'd ever met. And somehow that's exactly what made her a target. The letters came daily after that, each one more absurd than the last. Jogging attire does not meet the aesthetic standards of our community. Muscle exposure during outdoor exercise can be considered threatening to more sensitive residents. Daily walks without a visible HOA identification badge may result in administrative reprimands. I stared at them like they were parodies. Sam? She ignored them. Every morning, she laced up her boots, threw on her tank top and tactical leggings, and took her morning perimeter walk around the block like she had done in every deployment zone we'd ever lived in. That's just who she was. She walked to map. She walked to feel secure. She walked to assess threats, even if she didn't call it that. But the HOA didn't see discipline or vigilance. They saw a threat to their delusions of control. The next letter upped the ante. Failure to remove unauthorized flags from your vehicle may result in a formal notice of violation. The flag in question, a small Delta Force decal on the back of her truck, barely the size of a playing card. When she refused to remove it, the fines began. $50, then $100, then a formal citation posted to our front door with the word non-compliant printed in block red letters. Karen, the HOA president, made it a point to coincidentally walk past our house during Sam's workouts. She'd stop, pause dramatically at the edge of the driveway, and make a show of pulling out her little notebook. Sometimes she'd snap pictures. Other times, she'd mutter things just loud enough for us to hear. Too aggressive for family areas. Military presence should remain discreet. Intimidation doesn't belong in cul-de-sacs. Sam always smiled at her. That's what scared Karen more than anything. That calm, that poise. Like she had no idea what Sam was capable of. Like she didn't realize she was poking a bear that could eviscerate her without even raising its voice. It wasn't just Karen. Within the first 2 weeks, a strange group started trailing Sam during her walks. For men, all middle-aged, all wearing some version of tactical gear, cargo pants, black boots, beige polos tucked into belts like they were gearing up for combat in a strip mall. They followed at a distance, holding walkie-talkies, jotting notes in little memo pads like dollar store feds. We dubbed them the Duck Patrol. They walked in a line, always the same route, always 10 paces behind Sam. One day she stopped and turned around. "You boys get lost?" she asked. The one in front blinked, clearly thrown off. "Neighborhood watch," he said stiffly. "This is a secure community. You're not wearing your HOA issued tag." Sam raised an eyebrow. "I'm not a dog," she said. "I don't wear tags." He flinched but held his ground. "We're just maintaining visibility." Sam smiled, that tight, dangerous smile I'd seen before in briefing rooms right before she dismantled an insurgent compound. "Then maintain from somewhere else." The next day, one of them tried to photograph her in our backyard through a gap in the fence. Sam was waiting. She didn't say a word, just stood there, arms crossed, watching as the man fumbled his phone and stumbled backward into a sprinkler. She could have called the police. She didn't. "They're testing me," she told me later that night, her voice like steel. "I want to see how far they're willing to go." The answer, it turns out, was much farther than we thought. It escalated quietly at first, garden inspections that happened without notice. Trash cans moved mysteriously to the street early in the morning, resulting in multiple illegal placement fines. The water bill surged inexplicably after someone tampered with our irrigation system. Then came the camera. One day, Sam spotted it mounted discreetly in a tree across the street, pointed directly at our front door. I climbed the tree that night. No branding, just a wide-angle lens and a small blinking red light. When I removed it, I found a hidden tag, property of Meadow Creek Protective Services. I looked them up. Nothing. No business listing. No LLC. Just a P.O. box that traced back to an address in our own neighborhood, Karen's. Sam was unmoved. "They're building a file," she said, flipping through the stack of violation notices we'd collected over the past 3 weeks. "Trying to provoke me, document me reacting. They think they can bait me." "Can they?" I asked. She smiled without humor. "They'll find out." Then came the whispering. Neighbors began crossing the street when they saw her. One elderly man, who'd initially baked us a pie, now ducked behind his bushes when Sam jogged past. The duck patrol started carrying radios with little earpieces, murmuring in code like they were guarding a foreign embassy instead of stalking a woman out for cardio. Then, one evening, Sam's entire truck was keyed from hood to tailgate. A deep, jagged cut. On the windshield, in shaky red spray paint. "This isn't a military base." That was the first time I saw her fists clench. But she didn't explode. She didn't call the cops. She didn't even take a picture. She simply pulled out a pocket knife, scraped off the paint, and sanded the scratches herself. "They're going to push harder now," she said. "They think silence means weakness." And push harder they did. That weekend, we received a hand-delivered notice from a group calling themselves the Meadow Creek Tactical Compliance Division. The envelope was stamped with a gold embossed seal that looked like it had been made at a middle school arts and crafts table. Inside, a typed letter, effective immediately, all residents deemed non-conforming may be subject to personal enforcement inspections by the MCTCD, a sanctioned subcommittee of the HOA board. I nearly laughed, until I saw the signature at the bottom. Commander Douglas Rayburn, Tactical Enforcement Officer. That was the Duck Patrol's leader, and he had just promoted himself to commander. My wife read the letter, folded it calmly, and said, "He's going to try something." "Try what?" I asked. "Anything," she said. "Everything. These are the kinds of people who crave control and mistake uniforms for power. They think I'm alone out here, that we're easy targets." She looked me dead in the eyes. "We need to start recording everything." So we did. Motion sensors went up. Hidden cameras in the flower beds. Mic pickups installed in the mailbox post. Sam mapped her daily walk routes and started logging every tale, every incident, every instance of a clipboard aimed like a weapon. That's when the HOA Watch Corps got sloppy. They stopped hiding, started following her onto private trails, started brandishing ID badges that looked like they were printed at Staples. One of them even attempted to block her path with his truck, claiming she needed pre-clearance to walk unescorted during inspection hours. She walked right past him without a word. That night, we found our home security footage had been tampered with, 2 hours mysteriously deleted from the cloud. The next morning, we found a notice of non-cooperative behavior taped to our door with duct tape. The timestamp, the exact 2 hours that had vanished. Sam didn't say anything, but she sharpened her K-bar knife that night and left it next to the door. Looking back, I realized the HOA wasn't just enforcing their absurd rules. They were cultivating a fantasy, one where suburban tyrants could pretend they were in charge of something bigger than picket fences and patio paint codes. They saw Sam, a real warrior, and it made them feel small. So they did what small people always do. They tried to destroy what reminded them of their own insignificance. But what they didn't realize is that Sam wasn't just calm. She was waiting, letting them walk deeper into their own web. Because once she moved, it would be too late for anyone to stop what came next. The transformation from overzealous homeowners to something more sinister happened faster than I expected. It was like watching a homeowners association cosplay slip into full-blown paramilitary fantasy. One week they were waving citation clipboards, the next they were strapping on tactical belts with pepper spray, radio earpieces, and body cams. I'm not exaggerating, they formed an actual unit. A militia. They called it the HOA Police Division. Karen even had the gall to introduce it on the neighborhood bulletin as a bold new security initiative for suburban safety. The post read like a manifesto. Meadow Creek Estates will now be protected by the HOA Police Division, comprised of trained volunteers focused on order, safety, and visual harmony. Residents must comply with all patrol directives during inspection windows. Visual harmony. That was their war cry. The worst part? They believed it. The man leading the charge was Douglas Rayburn, the self-appointed commander, who had once been nothing more than the neighborhood's most enthusiastic block captain. Before this, he was just a guy who blew leaves off his driveway twice a day and carried a laser pointer to point at unapproved window tinting. Now, he was stomping around in steel-toe boots and a patched-up vest that read, Neighborhood Enforcement Officer. I'll never forget the first time I saw him in his new getup. He was standing at the corner of the cul-de-sac, holding a radar gun and glaring at every car that passed under 20 miles per hour. Except it wasn't a radar gun. It was a laser level, a construction tool, and he was using it to measure the angle of deviation for each car's front grille, claiming certain models disrupted the community's visual coherence. Sam walked by him with her usual poise, earbuds in, jaw tight. He moved to block her path. "Ma'am," he said, not even hiding the puffed chest and awkward stance. "You've been observed walking during peak inspection hours without identification." Sam paused, slowly pulled out her ID card from a gym lanyard, and said, "U.S. Army, Delta, cleared for all theaters of operation." Rayburn blinked like a toad slapped with a calculator. She didn't wait for him to respond, just kept walking. I watched the footage from our security feed later that night. He stood there for 5 minutes after she left, like a man whose entire fantasy crumbled in one sentence. But it didn't stop him. The HOA Police Division tripled in size that week. Karen stood behind it like a general behind enemy lines. She began hosting nightly training sessions in the community center. We watched people march in wearing cargo vests and cheap Oakleys, most of them with potbellies and camo pants that had never seen a real deployment. They emerged an hour later with clip-on radios and fake badges made from laser-cut acrylic. One even had a laminated ID with the words, Special Operative, Urban Code Enforcement. They started staging patrols. Not just strolling, but active sweeping. Side-by-side formation down sidewalks, stopping to shine flashlights on decorative garden gnomes or to measure trash bin placements. They interrogated teenagers for biking without helmets. They issued verbal demerits to residents whose porch lights weren't daylight-balanced LEDs. One night, they knocked on our door at 11:38 p.m., citing a violation for non-standard curtain geometry. The curtains were drawn. The geometry? Triangular. It's psychologically aggressive, one of them explained. Sharp lines provoke subconscious unrest. Sam stood there in her pajamas, utterly expressionless. Then she leaned in and asked, "Do you gentlemen know the legal implications of impersonating a law enforcement officer on private property?" Their leader, a scrawny man named Benny who worked at a mattress store and insisted on being called Officer Ben, stammered something about neighborhood jurisdiction. Sam smiled, closed the door, and walked away. No threats, No shouting. Just a warning she knew they were too dumb to understand. That week, our mailbox was ripped off its post. A neighborhood patrol-only sign appeared staked into our front lawn. Then, one morning, we found a set of muddy boot prints leading to our back door. Nothing was stolen. No windows broken. Just a single photograph left on the welcome mat of Sam jogging mid-stride, circled in red ink with the words observe, document, prepare. I held the photo like it was a live wire. Sam held it like a dossier. She didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. She just muttered, "They're escalating." We filed a police report, of course. The officer on duty looked at the evidence, shook his head, and said, "Look, this is private property. If your HOA has gone rogue, we can't really intervene unless they break criminal code." I asked him what impersonating an officer counted as. He shrugged. "Depends on whether they flash fake badges or try to detain someone." The report was filed and forgotten within a day. That's when we realized the real law wasn't coming. That meant it was time to dig deeper. Sam started a dossier. Old habits die hard. She printed every HOA bulletin, circled the contradictions, mapped out the timeline of the HOA police growth. She tracked badge numbers, matched them to names, scoured public records for any businesses Karen might be linked to. That's when we found it. Meadow Creek Protective Services, LLC. Registered to Karen's maiden name. A private security company, operating under the same P.O. box as the HOA's official mailing address. No phone number, no website, just a shell. But enough to launder thousands in neighborhood security fees into personal accounts. They were funding this charade, fake uniforms, patrol gear, even weaponry through mandatory resident dues. Worse, some residents were being charged twice, under separate line items like emergency readiness and community stabilization. We found copies of emails from Karen to HOA board members labeled confidential, budget reallocation, showing how she diverted funds from infrastructure projects to compliance readiness training. What did that mean? Body cams, taser orders, zip ties purchased in bulk. In other words, they were preparing for actual enforcement, not just pretend patrols. Real conflict, real force. That became crystal clear the night we heard shouting outside. Sam and I bolted to the front door. 3 members of the HOA police division had stopped a teenager on a skateboard, claiming he was unauthorized non-motorized traffic. They'd surrounded him. One had drawn a baton. The kid's voice cracked as he begged to go home. Sam stepped outside, calm as always, and said, "Drop it. Now." The man with the baton turned toward her. "Ma'am, step back. This is HOA business." She didn't flinch. "You're impersonating law enforcement while threatening a minor. That's a felony. Do you want to see how fast I can detain you before real cops show up?" He hesitated, then backed down. The kid ran. Sam stared the 3 men down until they scattered. The next morning, we found another violation on our door. Obstructing authorized HOA field operations. Repeat offenses may result in detainment by neighborhood compliance officers. It was signed by Douglas Rayburn, with a new title under his name, Chief of Suburban Enforcement. That was it. Sam made one phone call. Just one. I don't know who she reached. Some contact from her base, maybe someone higher. I just remember her saying, "Asset compromised. Civilian escalation. Requesting passive oversight until further action can be justified." She hung up. That was the only sign I ever saw that she felt cornered. She didn't plan to defend herself. She planned to clean house. But the tipping point, the final straw that turned the situation from insane to unforgivable, came 2 days later. She was out walking late afternoon. I was watching the home security feeds, sipping coffee on the porch. That's when I saw it. A white pickup with magnetic decals reading MCPD Meadow Creek Patrol Division pulled up beside her, brake lights flashing. The door opened, and Douglas Rayburn stepped out. Fake badge clipped to his vest, hand on his hip. But this time his hand wasn't empty. He pulled a gun. It wasn't a taser. It wasn't a prop. It was a Glock. Real steel. Real threat. He raised it, pointed it directly at Sam's chest. I dropped my mug. Coffee exploded across the porch. I ran for the door, screaming her name, but I didn't have to, because in the 5 seconds it took for me to sprint down the steps, she was already behind him, disarmed, gun on the ground, Rayburn face down in the grass, arms twisted behind his back. His walkie-talkie squawked with panic chatter from his goon squad. "We've got a situation. Commander down. Repeat, Commander down." Sirens erupted in the distance. But it was too late. Rayburn was already moaning, his shoulder dislocated, his fantasy over. Sam stood over him, expression cold, controlled. "You just made the worst mistake of your life," she whispered. And she was right, because that wasn't the climax. That was just the catalyst, the bullet that fired the real operation. And by the time the rest of them realized what they had done, the entire suburban war they'd built was already collapsing, one fake badge at a time. The fallout from the gun incident should have been immediate, explosive, final. A man pulled a loaded weapon on an active-duty Special Forces operative on her own street. In any normal world, that's national headlines, criminal charges, prison time. But in Meadow Creek Estates, where HOA bylaws were treated as gospel and Karen's power had sunk into every bureaucratic crevice like mold behind drywall, it somehow became a misunderstanding. That's the word they used. That was the official explanation submitted to the sheriff's office, courtesy of Karen's personal attorney. An unfortunate miscommunication during a neighborhood enforcement check. I sat across from the sheriff himself as he read it aloud, his voice flat, eyes tired. "And this, Rayburn guy, he's not law enforcement. Never was." I nodded. "Never. Not even security licensed. Just a man with a fake badge and a real gun." The sheriff scratched his jaw and sighed. "Hell of a mess you got here, but we've got no formal charges. The guy's got a permit for the weapon. No one got shot. And your wife," he trailed off. "She didn't press charges." I nodded again. "She said she'd handle it." The sheriff leaned back. "Look, I'll be honest. I've been getting complaints about this neighborhood for a year. People too scared to speak out. You're the first ones who didn't just pack up and leave. But the moment this gets filed as criminal, it hits the mayor's desk. And the mayor golfs with the planning commissioner. You get where I'm going?" I did, loud and clear. Meadow Creek wasn't just rotting from the HOA inward, it was protected from the outside. A castle built on paperwork and fear. And that's why Sam didn't file charges. Because she knew we'd get one shot, one bullet, and it couldn't be wasted on a courtroom technicality. "Then we'll handle it another way," she said that night, pacing the living room, the photograph of Rayburn's weapon on our table, her hands moving with surgical precision as she mapped a war without bullets. "We don't need cops. We need proof. And we need power." We started with the cameras. Not just the ones on our property, but drones, hidden GoPros, dash cams mounted in discreet neighborhood hotspots. Sam spent hours plotting patrol routes, identifying choke points, predicting which direction Rayburn's goons would take next. "These guys think they're in an action movie," she muttered. "They're sloppy. They move like civilians pretending to be rangers." She was right. In 1 week, we caught video of 6 separate violations: trespassing, surveillance without consent, use of unauthorized uniforms, and one particularly damning clip where Officer Benny screamed at an elderly woman for trimming her rose bushes with unapproved tools. Her offense? Using gold-handled shears. "The HOA requires all lawn care instruments to match the bronze color palette," he barked. She wept on her own porch. They left a citation duct-taped to her gardening stool. Sam archived the footage with a label, "Psych Ops, Target Civilians." Meanwhile, Karen was doing damage control with the grace of a collapsing circus tent. Her public statements on Nextdoor grew increasingly unhinged. "We regret the recent overreach," one post read, "but residents must understand the delicate balance between community order and individual conduct." Another warned about outsider elements attempting to destabilize Meadow Creek's identity. We knew that was aimed at Sam. What Karen didn't know was that Sam had already begun building an underground. Not with weapons. With neighbors. She started small, talking to residents during her walks, listening instead of confronting. The Jenkins family, who had stopped hosting backyard cookouts after being fined for excessive smoke dispersion. The Alvarezes, whose basketball hoop had been dismantled at night for safety reasons. The Nguyen's, whose children were followed home for illegal sidewalk chalk art. They'd all stayed quiet out of fear. But Sam? She gave them something different. Not a fight. Plan. Together, we launched the Neighborhood Compliance Archive, an anonymous website disguised as a landscaping tips blog. Buried beneath fake posts about turf management and spring flowers were video testimonials, scanned violations, HOA meeting recordings, and an interactive map tracking every time a resident had been fined, cited, or threatened. Within days, submissions flooded in. Some were heartbreaking. A disabled veteran whose wheelchair ramp had been classified as visual clutter. A single mother billed $300 for unauthorized wind chimes. Others were absurd. One man fined for having a flag that wasn't approved by the HOA's Civic Display Subcommittee. That flag? The U.S. Marine Corps banner. Sam spent hours categorizing everything into patterns. Abuse of power, financial manipulation, surveillance overreach. This is a dossier, she said, eyes gleaming. A war crimes archive in miniature. All we need now is a moment to detonate it. That moment arrived sooner than expected. It was a Wednesday, 4:43 p.m. Sam was running late from base. I was home early. I stood in the kitchen pouring coffee when the motion alert pinged my phone. Front yard. I opened the app. What I saw made my blood run cold. The HOA patrol truck, white, dented, their fake police insignia peeling at the edges, was parked at the curb. Rayburn stood outside, dressed in full regalia. Black vest, hat, radio, sunglasses. His sidearm holstered, his clipboard trembling in his hands. And next to him, Karen, dressed like she was auditioning for the role of tyrannical principal in a 90s teen drama. Pearls, heels, and a little blue binder tucked beneath one arm. I stepped outside. "You're trespassing," I said. Rayburn didn't look at me. Karen smiled tightly. "We're conducting a community reconciliation visit," she said. "After recent events, the board has decided it's best to reset expectations before pursuing legal escalation." I laughed. "You mean, after you pulled a gun on my wife?" Karen's smile didn't budge. "That was handled internally." She opened the binder. "As you are aware, residents who have received 3 or more citations in a 30-day window may be subject to emergency relocation procedures." Relocation. I blinked. "Are you evicting us?" "Not evicting," she said sweetly. "Recommending alternative housing options through the HOA's Auxiliary Residency Committee." I nearly dropped my mug. "You invented a committee to exile us?" Rayburn shifted uncomfortably. I noticed the bulge at his hip. Not his weapon. Something boxier. A stun gun. "You need to leave," I said. "Now." Karen leaned in, her voice cold. "I suggest you take this warning seriously, because the next knock on your door won't be from me." They left without another word. That night, we got the final piece of the puzzle. Gerald Franklin, former HOA treasurer, rang our bell with shaking hands and a flash drive. "I can't stay long," he said, eyes darting toward the street. "But I can't be part of this anymore." The drive held financial records dating back 5 years, hundreds of invoices, bank transfers, and falsified maintenance reports. Karen had rerouted over $220,000 in resident dues to Meadow Creek Protective Services. Weapons orders, uniform expenses, even luxury travel bookings, disguised as patrol training retreats. One of the receipts? A stay at a 5-star resort in Aspen. Guest name? Director K. Whitmore. I showed Sam. She stared for a long time. "This is it," she said. "This is the trigger." 2 nights later, the HOA held its quarterly meeting in the community clubhouse. Sam attended alone. I watched from the porch, audio streaming through a concealed mic. Karen opened with the usual platitudes. Fiscal updates, community priorities, enforcement updates. Then Sam stood, calm, silent. She placed a manila envelope on the table. "These are federal crimes," she said, "committed by your board, by your president, your treasurer, your fake patrol." Karen tried to laugh it off. But then Sam began playing the recordings. Video of the gun being drawn. Audio of HOA members planning citations in advance to justify fines. A clip of Rayburn boasting about making an example of the soldier lady. The room was dead silent. Then Gerald Franklin stood and said, "Everything she said is true." The next morning, our house was toilet papered. The HOA police patrol was seen circling the block twice. Then they vanished. The website went viral. Local news picked it up. Then regional. Then national. Sam didn't say a word on camera. She didn't need to. The story told itself. HOA forms militia. Targets veteran. Covers up gun incident. Misuses thousands in funds. By Sunday, Karen had gone dark. Her house? Empty. Abandoned overnight. And Rayburn? Arrested for impersonating an officer and brandishing a weapon during a civil dispute. The charges weren't minor anymore. The feds were involved now. But even as it all collapsed, structures we'd thought impenetrable, people we'd thought untouchable, there was no celebration in Sam's eyes, just a quiet kind of purpose. "They thought they were enforcing order," she told me, staring out the window as news vans parked on our lawn. "But real order doesn't come from fear, comes from truth. And now everyone can finally see them for what they are." She took a sip of her coffee. Her hand didn't tremble. "Now it's time to burn the whole rotten system to the ground." And I knew she wasn't speaking in metaphor. Not anymore. In the days following the incident and the release of the HOA War Crimes Archive, Meadow Creek Estates became a living contradiction. Part tranquil suburban bliss, part boiling cauldron of paranoia and whispered panic. The streets were quiet, unnervingly so. Lawn sprinklers turned on and off like nervous clockwork. Porches once used for friendly chats now became watchposts. Curtains didn't flutter anymore. They twitched, yanked shut when Sam passed by on her walks. Something had shifted in the soul of the neighborhood. The HOA patrol was gone. Karen's empire had cracked. But the board hadn't fallen. Not yet. Because even after Rayburn was arrested and Karen went on indefinite leave, her structure, the dark arteries of control she built, was still alive. And Sam knew better than to celebrate halfway through a war. We weren't naive. We knew this wasn't over. The HOA board closed ranks immediately, appointing a soft-spoken retiree named Glenn as the interim president. Glenn was the type of man who wore pastel polos tucked into khakis and always had a lukewarm smile like he'd been chemically sedated. "We're taking this time to restore trust," he said in a neighborhood bulletin, which conspicuously avoided mentioning the gun, the fraud, or the fact that a federal investigation had already been launched. "Our community is healing. Let's move forward together." Sam clipped the bulletin to the fridge like a trophy. "Translation," she said, sipping her coffee. "They're scrambling to bury everything before the feds dig too deep." And she was right. Citations stopped for a week, then resumed, this time with different phrasing. Not violations, but courtesy notices. Not fines, but suggested donations to restore community harmony. But the notices all went to the same people, the ones who had spoken out, who had submitted footage to the archive, who had quietly allied with us. One by one, they started calling. The Jenkins got a letter about their dog's non-neutral bark tone. The Alvarezes received a formal request to relocate their child's trampoline 3 feet to the left for visual balance. Even Mrs. Dempsey, who was 84 and blind in one eye, got cited for aggressive curb flower choices. Sam had a whiteboard in our garage where she mapped each one, placing red dots on a grid to track who was being targeted. "Retaliation," she said. "Coordinated. Strategic." And then she added something I'll never forget. "They're using civility like a weapon. Death by politeness." That night we got our own letter. Not a fine, not a warning, but an invitation, hand-delivered. No return address. The envelope was thick. Inside was a folded card on ivory paper, printed with serif font and sealed with a gold-embossed wax emblem. It read, "You are hereby cordially invited to a private mediation session with the HOA Restoration Committee. Attendance is mandatory. Formal attire required. Location undisclosed. Directions will be provided upon RSVP." There was no contact info, just a note. "Arrive prepared for full disclosure." I showed it to Sam. She didn't speak for a full minute. Then she said, "It's a trap." But we went. Not because we were afraid, because Sam needed to see how deep the rot went. The directions led us to the clubhouse, but not the main entrance. Around the back, through a side gate, down a short path lined with decorative bamboo and LED solar lights. A new structure had been added, small, rectangular, like a storage shed converted into a meeting room. Inside were 6 members of the HOA board, seated at a long folding table covered in linen and bottled water. Glenn was at the center, his pastel polo replaced with a charcoal blazer that looked like it had been bought that morning for intimidation. "Thank you for coming," he said. "Please sit." Sam didn't. Neither did I. "We're here because we want to resolve this without further conflict," Glenn began. "We understand emotions have run high. There have been misunderstandings. Someone pulled a gun on me," Sam said. Glenn smiled like she'd mentioned a weather delay. "And that matter was handled. Mr. Rayburn acted independently." "No," Sam said. "He acted under your structure. He wore your badge. He cited your bylaws. You built him." Another board member, a woman named Tracy, spoke up. "That kind of language isn't productive." Sam stepped forward. "Let me make this productive, then. You've continued targeting residents under rebranded policies. You've pressured silent supporters into silence again. You've funneled funds through a shell company owned by your former president. And now you're running a cleanup operation disguised as a goodwill campaign. So no, this isn't a misunderstanding. This is a cover-up. And I'm here to put a stop to it." The air thinned. Then Glenn said something so brazen I thought he'd choked on his own smugness. "You don't understand the damage you've caused," he said. "The news coverage, the lawsuits, property values are dropping. Local elections are being disrupted. This isn't just about you anymore. It's about the system. And if you think that system will fall quietly, you don't know what you're dealing with." Sam stepped closer, her voice cold. "No, you don't know who you're dealing with." The room turned to ice. That night, we triggered phase 2. Sam reached out to someone she hadn't spoken to in 5 years. A man named Elliot, a former JAG officer and federal prosecutor turned civil rights attorney. They'd crossed paths during a case involving war crimes in another life. Now, Elliot was the legal scalpel we needed. He took one look at the archive and said, "This isn't just abuse. This is a criminal organization masquerading as governance. I'll take the case pro bono." He filed a multi-front legal assault that week. Civil suit for harassment, federal suit for organized racketeering, and a demand for a full audit of all HOA finances over the last decade. The board received the notice of litigation in manila envelopes delivered by uniformed process servers. One of them had the decency to vomit in a potted plant before collapsing into a chair. We weren't done. Using the documents from the flash drive and a few calls to Elliot's contacts in the Inspector General's office, we uncovered something worse. Multiple former HOA board members who had been paid off to stay quiet after resigning. One of them, a man named Curtis, agreed to meet us. He looked 10 years older than his age. "You don't get it," he told us in a diner booth. "Karen didn't just want control. She wanted surveillance. We approved a community watch camera plan 3 years ago. Next thing we know, she's installing motion sensors in people's backyard planters. Audio mics in wind chimes. She called it predictive monitoring. Said it was the future of HOA enforcement." He took a sip of coffee, hands trembling. She didn't trust order. She wanted obedience. Sam was quiet for a long time. Then she slid him a burner phone. "When the subpoenas come, answer them." Meanwhile, the neighborhood started to shift. Slowly, carefully. First, someone removed the courtesy notice from the Jenkins yard and burned it in a barbecue grill. Then the Alvarezes painted their mailbox neon green and posted a sign. We no longer recognize HOA jurisdiction. The Nguyen's chalked a full mural across the sidewalk, a phoenix rising from a broken seal that read, Meadow Creek Estates. Kids posed in front of it. Parents posted it on social media. The image went viral. National press started calling. The HOA board held an emergency meeting and tried to declare the mural an act of visual terrorism. That's when Elliot filed another motion, this time for defamation. Glenn resigned the next day, and still the board limped on. Sam understood that to destroy the system, we couldn't just expose it. We had to break its spine. That meant dismantling the legal mechanisms it used to enforce fear. So we launched Operation Disarm, an effort to empower residents to rescind their contractual agreements with the HOA under state law clauses for coercion and non-disclosure. Elliot drafted hundreds of opt-out letters, notarized them, and hand-delivered them with an army of neighbors now loyal to something real: justice. Every signature weakened the HOA's legal reach. Every withdrawal stripped it of funding, power, and presence. The board was hemorrhaging authority. They tried to pivot, rebrand, offer reconciliation credits to those who returned. But no one did, because Sam made sure they didn't have to fear anymore. One night, we heard a noise outside. Movement. Sam motioned for me to stay inside and slipped out the back. I watched from the window as she flanked the porch and spotted two figures trying to glue a traitor sign to our mailbox. She didn't say a word. She just stepped into the light. One of the men froze. The other dropped the glue can. "It's not what it looks like," he stammered. Sam stepped closer. "I know what it looks like," she said. "It looks like you're scared, because the old system made you feel powerful. And now it's gone." They didn't speak. They just ran. She picked up the sign, held it in her hands for a long time, and then burned it in the fire pit. The next morning, every remaining member of the board received a final warning, delivered by Sam personally. A letter, handwritten, just 3 lines. "This is your last chance to resign voluntarily. The federal complaint is complete. Next week we go public." No one responded, which meant it was time for the last strike. The final, coordinated takedown. The war was about to end, and Sam was ready to fire the last shot. The final strike wasn't delivered with noise. No sirens, no grand speeches, no visible fireworks. Just cold, calculated precision, the kind Sam had mastered over years in the field. The kind that doesn't scream. It whispers. It waits. And then it hits all at once. The Monday morning the HOA board was scheduled to meet for their emergency reorganization session. Sam and I sat in silence on the porch, coffee in hand. Her eyes never left the street. She knew what was coming. Every board member who had ignored the warning letter, everyone who thought they could outlast the storm, was about to discover what it felt like when the storm walked through the front door wearing a federal badge. They started arriving just before 9 a.m., pulling into the clubhouse lot in their shiny cars, clutching their briefcases like it was just another day of suburban tyranny. Karen wasn't among them. She was still missing, likely holed up somewhere trying to wrangle an attorney brave enough to defend suburban dictatorship and weaponized garden ordinances. But her loyalists were there. Tracy with her oversized pearls and ice-pick smile, Doug with his permatan and HOA tattoo still peeking out beneath his golf shirt, and of course, Interim President Glenn, now wearing a navy blazer like it made him bulletproof. They had no idea what was waiting inside. The moment they stepped into the clubhouse, the door shut behind them, and standing in the center of the main hall, dressed in crisp suits, were 3 federal agents from the Department of Housing and Urban Development, 1 forensic accountant from the Office of the Inspector General, and Elliot, holding a leather folder so thick it could have been a brick of justice. The agents didn't yell. They didn't threaten. They simply handed each board member a subpoena, one by one, while the accountant began taping off the filing cabinets. Phones were confiscated, laptops seized. Everything that had been used to wage a bureaucratic war against innocent residents was now evidence in a federal racketeering and fraud investigation. Outside, Sam moved. She wasn't part of the raid, not officially, but this was her operation in every meaningful way. She'd coordinated it with Elliot and the federal task force for weeks, mapping every angle, every escape route, every potential denial of accountability. She posted 2 volunteers outside the building, both former victims of HOA harassment, one of whom had been fined for having excessively joyous Halloween decorations. Their job was simple: document everything. From the moment the board members walked in to the moment they were let out. Confused, pale, some trembling, some red-faced with fury, most clinging to the last shreds of their fake authority like a child refusing to give up a broken toy. Tracy tried to claim diplomatic immunity, babbling about elected authority under community charter protections. One of the agents calmly read her Miranda rights. Doug insisted this was a political stunt. Another agent placed a search warrant down on the conference table with the kind of casual finality that says, "You're already finished." Glenn, sweet, jittery Glenn, asked if he could just resign and go home. The answer came in the form of a steel bracelet being clicked around his wrist. The news broke within an hour. Local station choppers hovered over the clubhouse. Reporters scrambled for footage as board members were marched out in single file, flanked by agents, their faces covered in sunglasses and shame. Sam didn't speak to the press. She didn't need to. By then, the Neighborhood Compliance Archive had already been mirrored across over 20 legal blogs, civil rights watchdog sites, and at least one military journal titled Domestic Authoritarianism: How HOA Power Goes Rogue. Social media exploded. Hashtags like #HOAFall, #KarenGate, and #Cul-de-sac-coup trended nationwide. Politicians issued statements. State representatives called for oversight reform. Even the governor made a comment during a press briefing, saying, "If we can't trust our neighborhoods to uphold constitutional rights, we've failed from the sidewalk up." But this wasn't just about exposure. Sam wasn't here for headlines. She was here for justice. And that meant legal demolition. Within days, Elliott filed an injunction to freeze all HOA bank accounts. A class action suit was launched on behalf of every resident fined, harassed, or surveilled without cause. The court appointed an independent auditor to comb through every financial decision made under Karen's presidency. What they found was staggering. Over $300,000 in misused dues. A private slush fund labeled Community Morale Initiatives that paid for everything from Rayburn's faux patrol equipment to Karen's travel to a security training symposium held at a spa resort in Sedona. Hundreds of violations issued under fabricated rules. A fund called Emergency Aesthetic Corrections used to secretly repaint fences and trim bushes without owner permission. And that wasn't even the most explosive part. Buried inside the seized files was something truly insidious. A spreadsheet labeled risk categories. Each resident had been ranked green, yellow, red, based on behavior. People who filed complaints, refused to pay fines, or were visually aggressive were all marked red. Sam was listed as black status. A note next to her name read, "Surveillance required. Recommend contact denial. Possible relocation enforcement." Elliott forwarded the document to the U.S. Civil Liberties Union. By morning, they had announced a joint legal action with a national firm, citing systemic abuse of civil rights. The neighborhood flipped. People started removing their HOA signs. One by one, the proud member of Meadow Creek Estates HOA plaques vanished. Neighbors knocked on our door with tears in their eyes. Some brought cookies. Others brought apologies. "We didn't know," one woman whispered. Sam didn't hold grudges. She simply nodded and said, "Now you do, so don't let it happen again." The sense of liberation was palpable. Flags were raised. Kids rollerblade without being chased by clipboards. One family even hosted a cookout with real charcoal, illegal under the previous rules. Sam and I were invited as guests of honor. Someone handed her a paper crown that said, "HOA Slayer." She wore it for exactly 4 minutes. Then came the final motion. Dissolution. The last legal step. The killing blow. At the next emergency community meeting, this time held at the local rec center instead of the HOA's now-defunct clubhouse, Elliott stood at the front of the room, surrounded by over 150 residents. The mood was electric, tense, hopeful. He explained the process. Under state law, if 75% of all voting members petitioned for termination of the HOA, its charter could be nullified. Permanently. No more rules. No more board. No more authoritarian play-acting from people who bought power like it was patio furniture. Just neighbors governing themselves. They voted. The results were unanimous. HOA dissolved. Charter terminated. The HOA was dead. Karen never reappeared. Her house went up for sale quietly, with no forwarding address. Rayburn was convicted on charges of impersonating an officer and unlawful brandishing of a firearm, sentenced to 18 months in a minimum security prison. The rest of the board took plea deals for financial misconduct, paid heavy fines, and were permanently barred from participating in any future HOA positions anywhere in the state. Tracy moved to Florida. Doug joined a monastery. Glenn moved back in with his sister in Idaho. Sam? She finally planted that raised-bed vegetable garden the HOA had blocked for 3 years. And me? I poured 2 coffees every morning. One for me, one for Sam. We sat on our porch and watched a neighborhood that finally felt like a community. No fear, no fines, just life. Sometimes people would walk by and thank her. "You saved this place," they'd say. "You brought it back." Sam always shook her head. "I didn't save it," she'd reply. "I just reminded everyone they were never powerless to begin with." The old HOA sign, once mounted proudly at the neighborhood entrance, was taken down ceremoniously and chopped into firewood. Someone handed Sam the plaque. She didn't burn it. She nailed it to the side of our garage upside down, as a reminder, because the truth is, justice isn't loud. It doesn't come from power or rules. It comes from people who refuse to be silent when silence is easier. From people who don't run when confronted with injustice but walk straight into it, unafraid. People like Sam. That's what the HOA never understood. You can build a system on fear. You can paper over your crimes with rules and bylaws. But eventually, someone walks in who knows how to fight fire with truth, and brings enough water to drown an empire in silence. And once the water comes, there's no patching the dam.